A New Crime by Mark Twain. Legislation needed. This country, during the last 30 or 40 years, has produced some of the most remarkable cases of insanity of which there is any mention in history. For instance, there was the Baldwin case in Ohio 22 years ago. Baldwin, from his boyhood up, had been of a vindictive, malignant, quarrelsome nature. He put a boy's eye out once, and never was heard upon any occasion to utter a regret for it. He did many such things, but at last he did something that was serious. He called at a house just after dark one evening, knocked, and when the occupant came to the door, shot him dead, and then tried to escape, but was captured. 2 days before, he had wantonly insulted a helpless cripple, and the man he afterward took swift vengeance upon with an assassin bullet had knocked him down. Such was the Baldwin case. The trial was long and exciting. The community was fearfully wrought up. Men said this spiteful, bad-hearted villain had caused grief enough in his time, and now he should satisfy the law. But they were mistaken. Baldwin was insane when he did the deed. They had not thought of that. By the argument of counsel, it was shown that at 10:30 in the morning on the day of the murder, Baldwin became insane, and remained so for 11 hours and a half exactly. This just covered the case comfortably, and he was acquitted. Thus, if an unthinking and excited community had been listened to instead of the arguments of counsel, a poor crazy creature would have been held to a fearful responsibility for a mere freak of madness. Baldwin went clear, and although his relatives and friends were naturally incensed against the community for their injurious suspicions and remarks, they said let it go for this time, and did not prosecute. The Baldwins were very wealthy. This same Baldwin had momentary fits of insanity twice afterward, and on both occasions killed people he had grudges against. And on both these occasions the circumstances of the killing were so aggravated, and the murders so seemingly heartless and treacherous, that if Baldwin had not been insane he would have been hanged without the shadow of a doubt. As it was, it required all his political and family influence to get him clear in one of the cases, and cost him not less than $10,000 to get clear in the other. One of these men he had notoriously been threatening to kill for 12 years. The poor creature happened, by the merest piece of ill fortune, to come along a dark alley at the very moment that Baldwin's insanity came upon him, and so he was shot in the back with a gun loaded with slugs. Take the case of Lynch Hackett, of Pennsylvania. Twice, in public, he attacked a German butcher by the name of Bemis Feldner, with a cane, and both times Feldner whipped him with his fists. Hackett was a vain, wealthy, violent gentleman who held his blood and family in high esteem, and believed that a reverent respect was due to his great riches. He brooded over the shame of his chastisement for 2 weeks, and then, in a momentary fit of insanity, armed himself to the teeth, rode into town, waited a couple of hours until he saw Feldner coming down the street with his wife on his arm, and then, as the couple passed the doorway in which he had partially concealed himself, he drove a knife into Feldner's neck, killing him instantly. The widow caught the limp form and eased it to the earth. Both were drenched with blood. Hackett jocosely remarked to her that as a professional butcher's recent wife, she could appreciate the artistic neatness of the job that left her in condition to marry again, in case she wanted to. This remark, and another which he made to a friend, that his position in society made the killing of an obscure citizen simply an eccentricity instead of a crime, were shown to be evidences of insanity, and so Hackett escaped punishment. The jury were hardly inclined to accept these as proofs at first, inasmuch as the prisoner had never been insane before the murder, and under the tranquilizing effect of the butchering had immediately regained his right mind. But when the defense came to show that a third cousin of Hackett's wife's stepfather was insane, and not only insane, but had a nose the very counterpart of Hackett's, it was plain that insanity was hereditary in the family, and Hackett had come by it by legitimate inheritance. Of course the jury then acquitted him, but it was a merciful providence that Mrs. H.'s people had been afflicted as shown, else Hackett would certainly have been hanged. However, it is not possible to recount all the marvelous cases of insanity that have come under the public notice in the last 30 or 40 years. There was the Durgin case in New Jersey 3 years ago. The servant girl, Bridget Durgin, at dead of night, invaded her mistress's bedroom and carved the lady literally to pieces with a knife. Then she dragged the body to the middle of the floor and beat and banged it with chairs and such things. Next, she opened the feather beds and strewed the contents around, saturated everything with kerosene, and set fire to the general wreck. She now took up the young child of the murdered woman in her blood-smeared hands and walked off through the snow, with no shoes on, to a neighbor's house a quarter of a mile off, and told a string of wild, incoherent stories about some men coming and setting fire to the house. And then she cried piteously, and without seeming to think there was anything suggestive about the blood upon her hands, her clothing, and the baby, volunteered the remark that she was afraid those men had murdered her mistress. Afterward, by her own confession and other testimony, it was proved that the mistress had always been kind to the girl. Consequently, there was no revenge in the murder. And it was also shown that the girl took nothing away from the burning house, not even her own shoes, and consequently robbery was not the motive. Now, the reader says, here comes that same old plea of insanity again. But the reader has deceived himself this time. No such plea was offered in her defense. The judge sentenced her. Nobody persecuted the governor with petitions for her pardon, and she was promptly hanged. There was that youth in Pennsylvania, whose curious confession was published some years ago. It was simply a conglomeration of incoherent drivel from beginning to end, and so was his lengthy speech on the scaffold afterward. For a whole year he was haunted with a desire to disfigure a certain young woman, so that no one would marry her. He did not love her himself, and did not want to marry her, but he did not want anybody else to do it. He would not go anywhere with her, and yet was opposed to anybody else's escorting her. Upon one occasion he declined to go to a wedding with her, and when she got other company, lay in wait for the couple by the road, intending to make them go back or kill the escort. After spending sleepless nights over his ruling desire for a full year, he at last attempted its execution, that is, attempted to disfigure the young woman. It was a success. It was permanent. In trying to shoot her cheek, as she sat at the supper table with her parents and brothers and sisters, in such a manner as to mar its comeliness, one of his bullets wandered a little out of the course, and she dropped dead. To the very last moment of his life, he bewailed the ill luck that made her move her face just at the critical moment. And so he died, apparently about half persuaded that somehow it was chiefly her own fault that she got killed. This idiot was hanged. The plea of insanity was not offered. Insanity certainly is on the increase in the world, and crime is dying out. There are no longer any murders worth mentioning, at any rate. Formerly, if you killed a man, it was possible that you were insane, but now, if you, having friends and money, kill a mate, it is evidence that you are a lunatic. In these days, too, if a person of good family and high social standing steals anything, they call it kleptomania and send him to the lunatic asylum. If a person of high standing squanders his fortune in dissipation and closes his career with strychnine or a bullet, temporary aberration is what was the trouble with him. Is not this insanity plea becoming rather common? Is it not so common that the reader confidently expects to see it offered in every criminal case that comes before the courts? And is it not so cheap and so common and often so trivial that the reader smiles in derision when the newspaper mentions it? And is it not curious to note how very often it wins acquittal for the prisoner? Of late years, it does not seem possible for a man to so conduct himself before killing another man as not to be manifestly insane. If he talks about the stars, he is insane. If he appears nervous and uneasy an hour before the killing, he is insane. If he weeps over a great grief, his friends shake their heads and fear that he is not right. If, an hour after the murder, he seems ill at ease, preoccupied, and excited, he is unquestionably insane. Really, what we want now is not laws against crime, but a law against insanity. There is where the true evil lies. A Reminiscence of the Back Settlements, by Mark Twain. Now that corpse, said the undertaker, patting the folded hands of the deceased approvingly, was a brick every way you took him. He was a brick. He was so real accommodating, and so modest-like and simple in his last moments. Friends wanted metallic burial case, nothing else would do. I couldn't get it. There weren't going to be time anybody could see that. Corpse said never mind. Shake him up some kind of a box he could stretch out and comfortable. He weren't particular about the general style of it. Said he went more on room than style, anyway, in the last final container. Friends wanted a silver doorplate on the coffin, signifying who he was and where he was from. Now you know a fellow couldn't roust out such a gaily thing as that in a little country town like this. What did Corpse say? Corpse said, whitewash his old canoe and daub his address and general destination onto it with a blacking brush and a stencil plate, long with a verse from some likely hymn or other, and pint him for the tomb, and mark him C.O.D., and just let him skip along. He weren't distressed any more than you be, on the contrary, just as calm and collected as a hearse horse. Said he judged that where he was going to, a body would find it considerable better to attract attention by a picturesque moral character than a natty burial case with a swell doorplate on it. Splendid man, he was. I drew their due for a corpse like that in any I've tackled in 7 year. There's some satisfaction in burying a man like that. You feel that what you're doing is appreciated. Lord bless you, so's he got planted before he SPI'd. He was perfectly satisfied. Said his relations meant well, perfectly well, but all them preparations was bound to delay the thing more or less, and he didn't wish to be kept layin' round. You never see such a clear head as what he had, and so calm and so cool. Just a hunk of brains, that is what he was. Perfectly awful. It was a ripping distance from one end of that man's head to t'other. Often and over again he's had brain fever a-raging in one place, and the rest of the pile didn't know anything about it, didn't affect it any more than an Indian insurrection in Arizona affects the Atlantic states. Well, the relations, they wanted a big funeral, but Corpse said he was down on flummery, didn't want any procession, fill the hearse full of mourners, and get out a stern line and tow him behind. He was the most down on style of any remains I ever struck. A beautiful, simple-minded creature was what he was, you can depend on that. He was just set on having things the way he wanted them, and he took a solid comfort in laying his little plans. He had me measure him and take a whole raft of directions. Then he had a minister stand up behind a long box with a tablecloth over it and read his funeral sermon, saying encore, encore, at the good places, and making him scratch out every bit of brag about him and all the highfalutin. And then he made them trot out the choir so's he could help them pick out the tunes for the occasion, and he got them to sing Pop Goes the Weasel, because he'd always liked that tune when he was downhearted, and solemn music made him sad. And when they sung that with tears in their eyes because they all loved him, and his relations grieving around, he just laid there as happy as a bug, and trying to beat time and showing all over how much he enjoyed it. And presently he got worked up and excited, and tried to join in. For mind you, he was pretty proud of his abilities in the singing line, but the first time he opened his mouth and was just going to spread himself, his breath took a walk. I never see a man snuffed out so sudden. Ah, it was a great loss. It was a powerful loss to this poor little one-horse town. Well, I hain't got time to be palavering along here, got to nail on the lid and mosey along with him. And if you'll just give me a lift, we'll skeet him into the hearse and meander along. Relations bound to have it so don't pay no attention to dying injunctions, minute a corpse is gone. But if I had my way, if I didn't respect his last wishes and tow him behind the hearse, I'll be cussed. I consider that whatever a corpse wants done for his comfort is a little enough matter, and a man hain't got no right to deceive him or take advantage of him, and whatever a corpse trusts me to do I'm a-going to do, you know, even if it's to stuff him and paint him yaller and keep him for a keepsake, you hear me. He cracked his whip and went lumbering away with his ancient ruin of a hearse, and I continued my walk with a valuable lesson learned that a healthy and wholesome cheerfulness is not necessarily impossible to any occupation. The lesson is likely to be lasting, for it will take many months to obliterate the memory of the remarks and circumstances that impressed it. A Royal Compliment by Mark Twain. The latest report about the Spanish crown is that it will now be offered to Prince Alfonso, the second son of the King of Portugal, who is but 5 years of age. The Spaniards have hunted through all the nations of Europe for a king. They tried to get a Portuguese in the person of Dom Luis, who is an old ex-monarch. They tried to get an Italian, in the person of Victor Emmanuel's young son, the Duke of Genoa. They tried to get a Spaniard, in the person of Espartero, who was an octogenarian. Some of them desired a French Bourbon, Montpensier. Some of them a Spanish Bourbon, the Prince of Asturias. Some of them an English prince, one of the sons of Queen Victoria. They have just tried to get the German Prince Leopold. But they have thought it better to give him up than take a war along with him. It is a long time since we first suggested to them to try an American ruler. We can offer them a large number of able and experienced sovereigns to pick from and skilled in statesmanship, versed in the science of government, and adepts in all the arts of administration, men who could wear the crown with dignity and rule the kingdom at a reasonable expense. There is not the least danger of Napoleon threatening them if they take an American sovereign. In fact, we have no doubt he would be pleased to support such a candidature. We are unwilling to mention names, though we have a man in our eye whom we wish they had in theirs. New York Tribune. It would be but an ostentation of modesty to permit such a pointed reference to myself to pass unnoticed. This is the second time that the Tribune, no doubt sincerely looking to the best interests of Spain and the world at large, has done me the great and unusual honor to propose me as a fit person to fill the Spanish throne. Why the Tribune should single me out in this way from the midst of a dozen Americans of higher political prominence is a problem which I cannot solve. Beyond a somewhat intimate knowledge of Spanish history and a profound veneration for its great names and illustrious deeds, I feel that I possess no merit that should peculiarly recommend me to this royal distinction. I cannot deny that Spanish history has always been mother's milk to me. I am proud of every Spanish achievement, from Hernando Cortez's victory at Thermopylae down to Vasco Núñez de Balboa's discovery of the Atlantic Ocean, and of every splendid Spanish name, from Don Quixote and the Duke of Wellington down to Don Cesar de Bazan. However, these little graces of erudition are of small consequence, being more showy than serviceable. In case the Spanish scepter is pressed upon me, and the indications unquestionably are that it will be I shall feel it necessary to have certain things set down and distinctly understood beforehand. For instance, my salary must be paid quarterly in advance. In these unsettled times, it will not do to trust. If Isabella had adopted this plan, she would be roosting on her ancestral throne today, for the simple reason that her subjects never could have raised 3 months of a royal salary in advance, and of course they could not have discharged her until they had squared up with her. My salary must be paid in gold. When greenbacks are fresh in a country, they are too fluctuating. My salary has got to be put at the ruling market rate. I am not going to cut under on the trade, and they are not going to trail me a long way from home and then practice on my ignorance and play me for a Royal North Adams Chinaman, by any means. As I understand it, imported kings generally get 5 millions a year and house rent free. Young George of Greece gets that. As the revenues only yield 2 millions, he has to take the national note for considerable, but even with things in that sort of shape he is better fixed than he was in Denmark, where he had to eternally stand up because he had no throne to sit on, and had to give bail for his board, because a royal apprentice gets no salary there while he is learning his trade. England is the place for that. $50,000 a year Great Britain pays on each royal child that is born, and this is increased from year to year as the child becomes more and more indispensable to his country. Look at Prince Arthur. At first he only got the usual birth bounty, but now that he has got so that he can dance, there is simply no telling what wages he gets. I should have to stipulate that the Spanish people wash more and endeavor to get along with less quarantine. Do you know, Spain keeps her ports fast locked against foreign traffic 3/4 of each year, because one day she is scared about the cholera, and the next about the plague, and next the measles, next the whooping cough, the hives, and the rash. But she does not mind leonine leprosy and elephantiasis any more than a great and enlightened civilization minds freckles. Soap would soon remove her anxious distress about foreign distempers. The reason arable land is so scarce in Spain is because the people squander so much of it on their persons, and then when they die it is improvidently buried with them. I should feel obliged to stipulate that Marshal Serrano be reduced to the rank of constable, or even roundsman. He is no longer fit to be city marshal. A man who refused to be king because he was too old and feeble is ill-qualified to help sick people to the station house when they are armed, and their form of delirium tremens is of the exuberant and demonstrative kind. I should also require that a force be sent to chase the late Queen Isabella out of France. Her presence there can work no advantage to Spain, and she ought to be made to move at once. Though, poor thing, she has been chaste enough heretofore for a Spanish woman. I should also require that. I am at this moment authoritatively informed that the Tribune did not mean me, after all. Very well, I do not care 2 cents. A telephonic conversation. By Mark Twain. Consider that a conversation by telephone when you are simply sitting by and not taking any part in that conversation is one of the solemnest curiosities of modern life. Yesterday, I was writing a deep article on a sublime philosophical subject. While such a conversation was going on in the room, I noticed that one can always write best when somebody is talking through a telephone close by. Well, the thing began in this way. A member of our household came in and asked me to have our house put into communication with Mr. Bagley's downtown. I have observed in many cities that the sex always shrink from calling up the central office themselves. I don't know why, but they do. So I touched the bell, and this talk ensued. Central office. Gruffy. Hello. Is it the central office? C.O. Of course it is. What do you want? Will you switch me on to the Bagleys, please? C. Oh, all right. Just keep your ear to the telephone. Then I heard K-look, 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 klook, 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 klook. Then a horrible gritting of teeth, and finally a piping female voice. Why, yes? Rising inflection. Did you wish to speak to me? Without answering, I handed the telephone to the applicant and sat down. Then followed that queerest of all the queer things in this world. A conversation with only one end of it. You hear questions asked. You don't hear the answer. You hear invitations given. You hear no thanks in return. You have listening pauses of dead silence, followed by apparently irrelevant and unjustifiable exclamations of glad surprise or sorrow or dismay. You can't make head or tail of the talk, because you never hear anything that the person at the other end of the wire says. Well, I heard the following remarkable series of observations, all from the one tongue and all shouted, for you can't ever persuade the sex to speak gently into a telephone. Yes? Why, how did that happen? Pause. What did you say? Pause. Oh no, I don't think it was. Pause. No. Oh no, I didn't mean that. I meant, put it in while it is still boiling or just before it comes to a boil. Pause. What? Pause. I turned it over with a backstitch on the selvage edge. Pause. Yes, I like that way, too, but I think it's better to baste it on with Valenciennes or Bombazine, or something of that sort. It gives it such an air and attracts so much noise. Pause. It's 49th Deuteronomy, 64th to 97th inclusive. I think we ought all to read it often. Pause. Perhaps so. I generally use a hairpin. Pause. What did you say? Aside. Children, do be quiet. Pause. Oh, B flat. Dear me, I thought you said it was the cat. Pause. Since when? Pause. Why, I never heard of it. Pause. You astound me. It seems utterly impossible. Pause. Who did? Pause. Goodness gracious. Pause. Well, what is this world coming to? Was it right in church? Pause. And was her mother there? Pause. Why, Mrs. Bagley, I should have died of humiliation. What did they do? Long pause. I can't be perfectly sure because I haven't the notes by me, but I think it goes something like this. Derolly lolol, lol lolly lolol, oh tolly lololly oily I do. And then repeat, you know. Pause. Yes, I think it is very sweet and very solemn and impressive, if you get the andantino and the pianissimo right. Pause. Oh, gumdrops, gumdrops. But I never allow them to eat striped candy. And of course they can't, till they get their teeth, anyway. Pause. What? Pause. Oh, not in the least, go right on. He's here writing, it doesn't bother him. Pause. Very well, I'll come if I can. Aside. Dear me, how it does tire a person's arm to hold this thing up so long. I wish she'd. Pause. Oh no, not at all. I like to talk, but I'm afraid I'm keeping you from your affairs. Pause. Visitors? Pause. No, we never use butter on them. Pause. Yes, that is a very good way. But all the cookbooks say they are very unhealthy when they are out of season. And he doesn't like them, anyway, especially canned. Pause. Oh, I think that is too high for them. We have never paid over 50 cents a bunch. Pause. Must you go? Well, goodbye. Pause. Yes, I think so. Goodbye. Pause. For o'clock, then I'll be ready. Goodbye. Pause. Thank you ever so much. Goodbye. Pause. Oh, not at all. Just as fresh, which? Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Goodbye. Hangs up the telephone and says, oh, it does tire a person's arm so. A man delivers a single brutal goodbye, and that is the end of it. Not so with the gentle sex I say it in their praise. They cannot abide abruptness. A true story, repeated word for word as I heard it. By Mark Twain. It was summertime and twilight. We were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, on the summit of the hill, and Aunt Rachel was sitting respectfully below our level on the steps, for she was our servant and colored. She was of mighty frame and stature. She was 60 years old, but her eye was undimmed and her strength unabated. She was a cheerful, hearty soul, and it was no more trouble for her to laugh than it is for a bird to sing. She was under fire, now, as usual when the day was done. That is to say, she was being chaffed without mercy, and was enjoying it. She would let off peal after peal of laughter, and then sit with her face in her hands and shake with throes of enjoyment which she could no longer get breath enough to express. At such a moment as this a thought occurred to me, and I said, Aunt Rachel, how is it that you lived 60 years and never had any trouble? She stopped quaking. She paused, and there was a moment of silence. She turned her face over her shoulder toward me and said, without even a smile in her voice, Mr. C, is you in earnest? It surprised me a good deal, and it sobered my manner and my speech too. I said, why, I thought, that is, I meant, why, you can't have had any trouble. I've never heard you sigh, and never seen your eye when there wasn't a laugh in it. She faced fairly around, now, and was full of earnestness. Has I had any trouble? Mr. C, I's gwine to tell you. Den I leave it to you. I was bound down mongst the slaves. I knows all about slavery, case I been one of my own sef. Well, saw, my old man, dat's my husband. He was lovin' and kind to me, just as kind as you is to yo own wife. And we had children, 7 children. And we loved dem children just the same as you loves yo children. Dey was black, but the Lord can't make no children so black, but what day mother loves him and wouldn't give him up? No, not for anything dat's in dis whole world. Well, saw, I was raised in Olefo, Ginny, but my mother she was raised in Maryland. And my souls, she was towable when she'd get started. My lawn, but she'd make the fur fly. When she'd get into dim tantrums, she always had one word that she said. She'd straighten herself up and put her fists in her hips and say, I want you to understand dat I wa'n't bound and mash to be fooled by trash. I's one o' the old blue hen's chickens I is. CSC, you see, dat's what folks dat's bound in Maryland calls deyselves, and dey's proud of it. Well, dat was her word. I don't ever forget it, Essie, she said it so much. And Essie, she said it one day when my little Henry tore his rise awful, and most busted his head, right up at the top of his forehead, and Dennis didn't fly around fast enough to tend to him. And when dey talk back at her, she up and she says, look-a-here. She says, I want you in to understand dat I want bound and mash to be fooled by trash. I's one o' the old blue hen's chickens, I is, and den she clared dat kitchen and bandage up the chilly hersef. So I says dat word too, when I's riled. Well, bimeby my ol' Misty say she's broke, and she got to sell all the ness on the place. And when I hear dat day gwine to sell us all off at action in Richmond, oh de good gracious, I know what dat mean. Aunt Rachel had gradually risen, while she warmed to her subject, and now she towered above us, black against the stars. They put chains on us and put us on a stand, as high as this passage, 20 foot high, and all the people stood around, crowds and crowds. And they'd come up down, look at us all rune, and squeeze our arm, and make us get up and walk, and then say, this one don't mount to much. And they sold my old man, and took him away, and they begin to sell my children and take them away, and I begin to cry. And the man say, shut up yo damn blubberin', and hit me on the mouth with his horn. And when the last one was gone but my little Henry, I grab him clost up to my breas so, and I riss up and says, you shan't take him away, I says. I'll kill the man dat touches him, I says. But my little Henry whisper and say, I gwine to run away, and den I workin' by yo freedom. Oh, bless the chili, he always so good. But they got him, the men did. But I took and tear the cloes mos off of him, and beat him over the head with my chain. And they give it to me too, but I didn't mind dat. Well, da was my old man gone, and all my chillin', all my 7 chillin', and 6 of 'em I hain't set eyes on agin to dis day, and dat's 22 year ago last Easter. The man dat bought me belong in Newbern, and he took me da. Well, find me the years roll on and the devav come. My marster he was a Confederate colonel, and I was his family's cook. So when the Unions took dat town, they all run away and left me all by myself with the other NS in dat Monza's big house. So the big Union officers move in da, and they ask what I cook for dem. Lord bless you, says I, that's what I's for. They want no small fry officers, mind you, they was the biggest they is. And the way they made dem sojers mosey rune. The general he told me to boss dat kitchen, and he say, if anybody come meddlin' with you, you just make 'em walk chalk. Don't you be afeard, he say, you's mong friends now. Well, I thinks to myself, if my little Henry ever got a chance to run away, he'd make to the north, o' course. So one day I comes in da what a big officers was in the parlor, and I drops a kerchie. So and I up and told 'em about my Henry, they a listenin' to my troubles just the same as if I was white folks. And I says, what I come for is BKRSE if he got away and got up north where you Gimmon comes from, you might have seen him, maybe, and could tell me so as I could find him AGN. He was very little. He had a SKR on his left rise, and at the top of his forehead. Den they mournful, and now the general say, how long since you los him? And I say, 13 year. Den the general say, he would ain't be little Noamo, now, he's a man. I never thought o' dat beefo. He was only dat little feller to me, yit. I never thought 'bout him growin' up and bein' big, but I see it den. None o' de Gimmon had run across him, so dey couldn't do nothin' for me. But all dat time, I didn't know it. My Henry was run off to the north, years and years, and he was a barber too, and worked for his F. And bimeby, when Devav come, he ups and he says, I's done barbarin', he says. I's gwine to find my ol' mammy, lessen she's dead. So he sold out and went to Wade was recruitin', and hired his F out to the colonel for his servant. And den he went through the battles every wa, huntin' his ol' mammy. Yes indeedy, he'd hired a fust one officer and den another, tell he'd ransacked the whole South. But you see I didn't know nothin' 'bout dis. How was I gwine to know it? Well, one night we had a big sojer ball. The sojers Newbern was always havin' balls and carryin' on. They had him in my kitchen, heaps o' times. CSE it was so big. Mind you, I was down on sich doin's. BKRSE my place was wid the officers. And it rasped me to have dim common sojers cavortin' ruin my kitchen like dat. But I always stood around and kept things straight, I did. And sometimes they'd get my dander up, and den I'd make him clar dat kitchen. Mine I tell you. Well, one night, it was a Friday night. Day comes a whole platoon FMAN. Regiment dat was on guard at the house. The house was headquarters, you know, and den I was just a bilin'. Mad? I was just a boomin'. I swelled around. I just was itchin' for him to do somethin' for to start me. And dey was a waltzin' and a dancin'. My, but dey was havin' a time. And I just a swellin' up. Pooty soon, long comes sich a spruce young in, a sailin' down to room wid a yaller winch roon to waist. And rune day went, enough to make a body drunk to look at him. And when day got a breeze on me, day went to kino balancing around, fussed on one leg, and din on t'other, and smilin' at my big red turban, and making fun, and I ups and says, get along wid you, rubbage. The young man's face kino changed, all of a sudden, for about a second, but den he went to smilin' agin, same as he was befo. Well, 'bout dis time, in come some ns dat played music and belonged to de band, and day never could get along without puttin' on airs. And at de very fust air day put on dat night, I lit into him, they laughed, and dat made me wuss. De rezo de ns got to Logan, and it din my soul alive, but I was hot. My eye was just a-blazin'. I just straightened myself up, so, just as I is now, plumb to de ceilin' mo's, and I digs my fists into my hips, and I says, look a-here. I says, I want you ns to understand, dat I wa'n't bound to mash to be fooled by trash. I's one o' de old blue hen's chickens, I is, and den I see dat young man stand a-starin' and stiff, lookin' kino up at de ceilin' like he got somefin, and couldn't member it no mo. Well, I just march on dem ns, so, lookin' like a Janelle, and a day just cave away befo me and out it to do. And as dis young man was a-goin' out, I hear him say to another in, Jim, he says, you go long and tell the captain I be on Han about 8 o'clock in de morning. Day's somefin on my mind, he says, I don't sleep no mo dis night. You go long, he says, and leave me by my own sef. Dis was 'bout 1 o'clock in de morning. Well, 'bout 7, I was up and on Han, gettin' de officer's breakfast. I was a-stoopin' down by de stove, just so, same as if yo foot was de stove, and I'd opened de stove do wid my right han. So, pushin' it back, just as I pushes yo foot, and I just got de pan o' hot biscuits in my han and was 'bout to raise up, when I see a black face come around under mine, and de eyes a-lookin' up into mine, just as eyes a-lookin' up clost under yo face now. I just stopped right da, and never budged, just gazed, and gazed, so, and de pan begin to tremble, and all of a sudden I knowed. De pan drop on de flow, and I grab his left han and shove back his sleeve, just so, as I's doin' to you. And den I goes for his forehead and push de hair back, so, and boy, I says, if you ain't my Henry, what is you doin' wid dis welt on yo, rise and dat skr on yo forehead? De Lord God o be heaven be praise. I got my own AGN. Oh no, Mr. C, I hain't had no trouble, and no joy.